Hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to another Critique of the Week. It's Friday, October 15th. So glad you could join me. Hello to James Langford, Carlian Blackman, D. Coleman. Good to see you all. Let's see, over on Facebook, do we have anybody yet? We have one person watching, 6 people watching. Somebody say hi so I can say hello. Make sure the comments are working. Let's see. Then over, hey, Diana Castle. Good to see you, Diana. Thanks for stopping by and saying hi. Howdy, Nate Jacobs. Okay, so we're going to be Critique the Week, as always. The point of this show is to give that workshop experience to people who might not have access to it otherwise. And so leave your comments in the chat messages, and I'll pass them along and share them, and the poets will be reading these too. We have a short kind of a segment here. The second poet today, only has one short poem, and I asked, it's Alex Phuong, and I asked if he wanted to send another, and he didn't. So we have one short poem for the second half. I'm happy to fill up the whole hour. So what we will do is a kind of grab bag, I think. We did this a while ago. And so what I want you to do is, if you have a poem that you're having trouble with something, and you have like one kind of general question about the poem that you would like the group to discuss and answer, if you have that, then email it to openmic. That's openmic@rattle.com. Email me the poem there. Ask your question, like right now. And at the end of the show, we'll probably have like 20 minutes left or so after we get through these 3 poems that we have today. And then we'll do kind of like a grab bag, and we'll just see what we can help answer your questions and things like that. So if you have any poems, just say like, I was wondering about this aspect of this poem, and then we'll look at just kind of that instead of like the whole poem in total. We'll sort of focus on one topic. Does that make sense? So I'll put up these just so you can see it. This is the email address. Email your poem if you'd like it featured at the end of the hour. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit. Ask a question. Email the poem to openmic. It's openmic@rattle.com right there. So do that, and then we'll see what we have at the end of the show, because I like spending a whole hour, and I think we're going to get through these 3 poems quicker than an hour. So why don't you go ahead and do that if you would like. Let's see. We got a good crowd here. We got Dana Broadhead. We got Peggy Turnbull. We got Fran Smith. Good to see you all. Thanks so much. Okay, so let's do this first poem. This is Gavin Bourke, Memory Street. And let's see. Here we go. This is Gavin Bourke, Memory Street. The distinctive smells were the very first thing I noticed. Such an unexpected assault on the senses for a child under 10 years old. Stalls of fish trading hands, shouting bargains and prices in Dublin-accented rhythms and rhymes. Fleshy arms, no boundaries or barriers. Rusted steel frames and striped canopies. Trays and pallets stacked full of fruit and fish and vegetables, tomatoes, carrots and potatoes, records and paper bags, and dogs. Headscarves characteristic of facial lines and cigarettes. Kind smells, pats on the head, free lollipops and chocolate bars. Trays of red apples slipped in puddles. Helped carry the bags to the car, parked on Parnell Street, beside the meter, before collecting a white sliced pan of Johnson, Mooney, and O'Brien bread for lunch, and an almond ring for afterwards. That is Memory Street. Nice details in this poem. It kind of brings us there. And so the title sets it off and lets us know kind of what's about to go on. We're going to be working with memory, and there's a street scene here. And then we jump right in. The distinctive smells were. There's a bunch of places where there's a comma. I'm sorry, the lighting. My hand. It's always hard to get the lighting right, because your hand blocks the lighting from there, but then if I come from the top, there's a shadow. Anyway. So there are a bunch of places where there's a comma for no reason at the end of a line. The distinctive smells were the very first thing I noticed. And maybe there's a sense that you want a pause at the end of the line, and that's why there's a comma there. But there's a brief pause just as your eye scans back, and so there's no need for an extra pause. And it's just sort of jarring and a little bit just off-putting to have punctuation where it's not supposed to be, unless the poem is like doing that on purpose for a reason the whole way through, and this isn't the case here. So I'll note which ones to cut as we go through, but that's one that's unnecessary. The distinctive smells were the very first thing I noticed. Such an unexpected assault on the senses Assault on the senses is a bit of a cliche. You find a different word than assault or a different word than senses, some way to mix it up and make it fresh for a child under 10 years old. But we do get this nice setup to the scene, so we're sort of drawn into the poem pretty easily and quickly, I think. Stalls of fish trading hands, shouting bargains and prices. And again, here's another comma you don't need. Bargains and prices and Dublin accents and rhythms and rhymes. Fleshy arms, no boundaries or barriers, rusted steel frames and striped canopies. I think these are pretty good descriptions, and they are, I think, pulling us into the poem. I think you could do more, extend that even more, and because it's working. So I think you could even describe more of it. But the descriptions are what the poem has going for it. I feel like we're really sort of starting to feel like we're here as we move through the poem. Here's another comma, though, you don't need. Trays and pallets stacked full of fruit and fish and vegetables, tomatoes, carrots, and potatoes, records, paper bags, and dogs. I think this, I kind of tripped over this line a little bit with the carrots and potatoes. It feels like it wants to end here, and the dogs, maybe the dogs seem out of place a little bit, both in terms of with what you're describing, and syntactically too, because you sort of, with the rhythm of the sentence, you got this fruit and fish and vegetables, but with the line break, so you get this kind of like listy thing with like parallel, like pairs of items too. And so it feels like you're going to say fruit and fish and vegetables, tomatoes, carrots and potatoes, records and paper bags. It feels like it wants to end there. And I'm not really sure what the dogs are doing in this scene. And so I wonder if maybe that needs to be described, and maybe cut that and just make this a new sentence, and then describe what the dogs are doing so that we know why it's important that the dogs are there and what the dogs are doing. Because it's sort of a throw in, especially with the listing of food. For a second, I thought like hot dogs, but I think they're real dogs. I'm not even sure, though, for sure. So if you want to include the dogs, I would make this a whole new sentence, like, dogs and their blah, 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 doing their whatever, just describe what the dogs are doing. Headscarves, characteristic facial lines and cigarettes, kind smiles, pats on the head, free lollipops and chocolate bars, trays of red apples, slipped in puddles. The slipped in puddles, I'm not sure what that means. It's similar to the dogs. I'm not sure how the trays slipped in puddles. I'm not sure where to place that mentally. The other thing with this whole section, I feel like, is it starts to get too listy. for a very formal word there. It starts to feel, because we get sort of a list kind of thing here, then we get list kind of things here, and list kind of things here. And so the structure of the poem going on, it feels like a list poem. And it ends up, varying the syntax and the way that sentences are done. And I always point to, I think the best person at this that I know of is Alan Shapiro. So if you pick up an Alan Shapiro poem, just wonderful way that he creates this sort of sense of movement through different, like there's no two sentences are the same as far as like you would diagram them out in a Alan Shapiro poem. And that's sort of the height of what you can do to keep the variety and keep everybody engaged that way. But here the list starts to become like, this is the structure of the sentences I'm going to be using. And that gets boring eventually. So mix this up. But the descriptions are good. I mean, it's drawing us in there. Help carry the bags. And this help carry, is it I help carry? There's no subject in that sentence, which is a little off-putting. I tripped over it a little bit as I was going. Help carry the bags to the car, because no other sentences do that. Everything else is here. I notice, so we get the I, and everything else is sort of just description with the subject is just describing the situation. But here, there's an actual subject doing an actual verb, helped carry, and we don't have it. So is it I helped carry? I assume, but it's a little off-putting not having it there. Helped carry bags to the car parked on Parnell Street beside the meter before collecting a white sliced pan of Johnson, Mooney, and O'Brien bread for lunch, and an almond ring for afterwards. It's a nice memory. I like all the details. Like, I like the way the details are operating and sort of conjuring up the memory of this scene. But then the question is, like, why is this an important memory? I mean, we get the memory. We're like sort of sharing and being conveyed the memory, but why is it an important memory? That's sort of left but why does the poem need to be written is always a question that is important for a poem. And because there has to be some sense of meaning you're drawing and then transferring to someone else from it. And nostalgia alone kind of isn't enough. Like, we're sort of waiting for almost a punchline, and then it doesn't really come. We just end up with, we get Memory Street as the title, we get the memory, but we don't really get the reason why it's conjured up or why it needs to be saved. I like the details. I really like the Johnson, Mooney, and O'Brien bread and the almond ring for lunch, or the almond ring for afterward. I think that works really well. It's just I'm left with a feeling of, like, the poem didn't go far enough into why it was created. And so my real advice is just to push this farther and see, like, it also sort of stays in one space. And there's no sort of like door to some other realm or some other thought, right? And so it's sort of like always here, it's describing here, and then you got to kind of make some kind of leap to another platform, you know? And I'm not sure how to do that because I'm not the author of this poem, but there's some place where this memory unlocks something else. It has to, because that's how our brains work. You know, we're associative thinkers, and this is associated with something else. So find the something else and then go somewhere else. And then you have the juxtaposition between the things that you're talking about, and that can be illuminating and give us the sense of the meaning that's sort of missing in this poem. So the real problem with the poem is just that it's sort of a one-dimensional journey through this memory street where we don't get to sort of go in a door, if that makes sense. So that is my opinion of the poem. Let's see what everybody else is saying. Bonnie Burchart says, very nice. Let's see. Got a good crowd. Thanks for everybody for joining me. Bonnie Burchart says, I like the fleshy arms, no boundary or barriers, makes me think of hugs without saying it right. That's a good point, too. There's this sort of a friendly feeling to this street, which is maybe that's the kind of thing where would trigger, like, the meaning behind it. The importance of this memory is the feeling of sort of kinship and that fleshy arms, no boundaries, really the no boundaries. That sort of gives that an emotional feeling to that, but we don't really explore it, I think. And so maybe that's the issue. Jenny Middleton says Dubliner's rhythms might scan better. Nate Jacobs says lists are okay, but these lists would benefit from some breaking up with some movement through the scene, some activity that maybe lends from one list to the next. Yeah, I agree with that too. Yeah, and then Mark Grenier says just what I was saying before, and he said it first, I think, but the scene is described from the point of view of a child, I think, but what we should make of it is unclear to me, and that's really the issue. Like, what is, and then Lisa Allison, what is at stake in this poem? So, Jenny Middleton, I think the poem is about experiencing a culture that sticks in the child's memory. Nate Jacobs, the final stanza is such a singular event, but it lacks some tension to get to it, or reason to invest in it. Give me something to feel strongly about it, whether good or bad feelings. And Jenny Middleton, the sound of words, the food, the experience of the market are important to this child. Yeah, so we get this sense, but we don't really know where to place it. So it needs, like I was saying, it needs some kind of transition between just being this memory of the street scene into the deeper aspect that made this, that sort of called this poem into being. And there's something there. And I think that whoever it was, I can't remember who it was, but who mentioned the no boundaries part, I think that's sort of the key. I think that might be what was drawing the poem to be created out of your subconscious, you know? And so finding a way to get to that, or get back to that and sort of illuminate that might be the key to this poem. Over on YouTube, D. Coleman says, I think the first stanza may be unnecessary if the title were something like A 10-Year-Old Remembers the Market. That's a better title. A 10-year-old remembers the market would be a stronger title. Memory Street, if I saw this in a table of contents, I wouldn't remember it or think, oh, I want to go read that poem. So it's one of the things you kind of want to think about with the title, is making it interesting enough to make somebody see it and then want to read the poem. And that's just one of the things that a title can do. And that would be a better title. And then you could cut away, and then you wouldn't have to worry about the cliche. There's not a whole lot of, there are great details later in the poem. But the first stanza has that cliche and then nothing really else positive or, that's really pushing you forward. It sets up the scene. But there's really nothing memorable about this first stanza. So I think this is a good suggestion by D. Coleman to just cut the whole first stanza and then make the title, the information that's given in this first stanza could be given in the title, which would make it a more interesting title. So great suggestion there, D. Let's see. And D. Coleman says, I always see lots of dogs on the street at markets. It just, I get that there could be dogs there. It's just not described. It's sort of out of place in the way that it's sort of, it's almost like an afterthought without any detail. And it's a place where there could be more detail. Like, what are the dogs doing? It's something to give it sort of a life, too, as you describe it, because the dogs are going to be moving and doing things. And even maybe going back to this feeling of the no boundaries and whatever emotionally that represents and the importance of. Let's see. So Angela Gartner says, also, we established it was a market. Maybe the third stanza isn't needed either, or go into one specific description. The third stanza, the trays, plates, yeah. I don't know. I like the. I mean, maybe these things could be described a little more. I mean, they're just tomatoes and carrots and potatoes. I mean, there's a way that you could describe how how they are in the bags or in the baskets, or how they look, how they're presented. There could be more description to that to make this more vivid. But I do like sort of the tour of the market. I wouldn't want to lose that too much, because that's what's sort of drawing you into the poem. You're sort of walking through the market as you go through the poem. Let's see. And Jamie O'Halloran Whitmarsh says the poem will come alive with some strong verbs that can convey tension and emotion. Yeah, good point there too. Okay, let's look at the other poem from Gavin. And let me see too. Has anybody sent a? Yeah, okay, we got a few poems here. We got one from Peggy Turnbull. We got one from James Lagford. So like I said, if you want, we're gonna have a grab bag at the end of the show because we're gonna have time for some extra stuff if you're coming late. So if you have a question, a poem you're having trouble with, and you want to help sort of with a specific question, like you're bringing your poem into the mechanic and saying, hey, there's a weird pinging sound, that kind of thing, email that to openmic@rattle.com. And at the end of the hour, the last 20 minutes or so, I think we'll have time to look at a few other poems as like a bonus round. So feel free. Open mic, that's openmic@rattle.com. Okay, so here is poem number 2 from Gavin Bourke. This is Buried Treasure. I opened the tin of my again we have this no comma there. I opened the tin of my grandfather's carpentry tools for the first time this year, removing the newspaper from 2004. With bread, soda, and vinegar, I began with the wrenches and the brass box ruler before the wooden chisel. Beneath layers of grime on the surface, I discovered his signature on the handle. After cleaning the old wooden plane, I finish with the brass grease gun and the brass and stainless steel plumb bobs attached to twine, this time discovering his initials etched into the metals. From hands to hands unknowingly, I had opened up a treasure chest of precious memories. So here is Buried Treasure. And we have the similar problem, like I said, with the commas that are, I guess you call them comma splices. Is that what you call them? They're just commas where they're not supposed to be. So we'll cut those out as we go, and just I won't make much of that anymore. But I opened the tin of my grandfather's carpentry tools for the first time this year, removing the newspaper from 2004. So for this first, again, Buried Treasure has a similar problem as the Memory Street title, as it's kind of boring. Like, it's just a dull kind of title. And again, the same advice that D. Coleman gave for the other poem could work really well here. The title could be, I opened the tin of my grandfather's carpentry tool, or something similar to that. And then you would have a more interesting title, and you wouldn't need to sort of slowly get into the poem. And I can see this poem. We talked about like how there were several lists in the last poem. This poem I can kind of see as a list, because the highlight of the poem for me was the way when you started taking out the wrenches as you were cleaning them, and seeing them laid out like one at a time in sort of a list type way. Really worked, I thought, because you sort of see as you would be pulling them out of a bag or something. And then what each one means, what it meant to the grandfather. It's the kind of poem that could work really well understated, I think. And so getting the details about the situation in this title, and then keeping it sort of, like understated, and just letting the descriptions of the items sort of tell the story, I think is a good way to go. And this is a good idea for a poem. I think it works really well. So if you, and again, this opening stanza doesn't have a lot of like pop to it. It's not like drawing us in with the details and the vividness and making us sort of feel the experience. It's just sort of setting it up. So get these details into the title, and then cut the whole first stanza, I would say. I like this as an opening though, with bread, soda, because you don't expect it either. If you were talking, if the title was just, I opened the tin of my grandfather's carpentry tools, right? And then he started with bread, soda, and vinegar. You don't really expect that as the first line. So it's sort of instantly, we have this, we're drawn to things that are strange and unexpected. And so that first line, if it's not where you expect to go with the tools at first, then you realize they're being cleaned. But I think it's a good way to start. So I think this would make a good first line. With bread, soda, and vinegar, I begin with the wrenches. And I wonder if even you could take out the I for this poem and write it in a way where just, you could say first with the wrenches, and it sort of just let the poem progress that way with being as distant as possible. I think that would be useful. So anyway, with bread, soda, and vinegar, I begin with the wrenches and the brass box ruler before the wooden chisel. I'd like to see a little bit more description. My grandfather, we had, or my great-grandfather actually, in the basement of my grandmother's house when she died, she just had these like mountains of stuff. And he was a tool and die maker. So he had all these weird tools like covered in dust, and you had no idea what they were even for. And so these older tools, which I assume they are, because they're the grandfather's carpentry tools, they'd be interesting to describe in more detail than this, just with the wrenches and the box ruler. Like what does the brass box ruler look like? And what are the wooden chisel? Like, you could really describe these things in a way that would be really interesting, I think, and just pull it more. It works well as it is, but it could really be brought to life with more description of those items as you go through. Beneath the layers of grime on the surface, I discovered his signature on the handle. So again, I think I would do this poem, first with the wrenches, the brass box ruler with its blah, 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 the wooden chisel or blah, 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 keep the descriptions going, beneath the layers of grime, beneath the grime on the surface. And then instead of I discovered, just his signature, like keep it really, there's a way that, being flat and sort of having a distance sometime can really work to heighten the emotion of the poem, where it's very understated and trying not to like push it. That can be where the poem or the emotion sort of emerges from. And so I would do it like this. I would say first with the wrenches, the blah, 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 beneath the layers of grime, then his signature on the handle, keep going through it that way without putting the I in there. After cleaning the old wooden plane, I finish with the brass grease gun. Again, we could have better descriptions of these, but they're interesting details though. Again, more description. Description. The only time I write by hand is the critiques of the week. After cleaning the old wooden plane, I finished with a brass grease gun and the brass stainless steel plumb bobs attached to twine, this time discovering his initials etched into metals. From hands to hands, unknowingly, I'd opened up a treasure chest of precious memories. And again, so here, like the beginning, this feels like a sort of a summary of what the poem is about. And I think it sort of detracts from the power of the poem to have it sort of explained here that I'm opening up precious memories, and where are the memories? If it's going to be about the memories would assume some kind of interactions between the grandfather and the speaker, right? And we never get that in the description. So I'm not sure how that really fits unless we wanted to see some of those scenes where they were working on things together. But again, I think this poem kind of works as a very simple, sort of short, understated poem where the details of what you're drawing out, we can sort of imply our own, like the care that the grandfather took with them and things like that, from just the descriptions of the things that are being pulled out. So I think this poem could work a little better that way. But if you want to focus on the precious memories, which it seems like it based on the ending, then maybe some of these items could be drawn out into scenes where we get to see the speaker's interactions with the grandfather. Like, what did you do together with the box ruler, if that's what's important here? So this poem has a couple different ways you could go with it. You could either go bigger or smaller. But anyway, let's see. So that is my rambling. Francis Smith says, lovely memories might be interesting to add in some memories of furniture pieces made. Yeah. Jenny Middleton says, if you're a carpenter, having a sharp metal blade on tools is important. Yeah, so those kind of details I think could be added. Jenny Middleton says wood plane, not wooden plane. Only the handle is. Okay, so it should be a wood plane instead of a wooden plane. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And Jamie O'Halloran and Whitmarsh says bread soda is what Americans call baking soda. Yeah, I think that was just implied. I didn't have any problem. Yeah. Okay. So over on YouTube, let's see what the YouTube comments are. So D. Coleman says, this year, so was the tin opened for the first time ever? Or for the first time this year? I'd cut this year. Yeah, I mean, I think that the first time is the first time since he died, I assume. It was the first time without him being here that this was opened. But that could be much more clear in this description. James Legford suggests from 2004 as another thing that I should have pointed out, because I was just going to cut this whole stanza anyway. But this line from 2004 is such a long, like writing it out this way, it's sort of stretching out. It's very empty of a lot of syllables for not a lot of payoff, a lot of space in the poem because it's just the date. So I would just write 2004. And maybe, add that into the title too, so we get the sense of how much time. Or maybe I open the tin, after 15 years, I open the tin of my grandfather's tools. Maybe that's the title. And then we don't need the date, because, that also means something different as time progresses. If someone's reading your poem in 2133, the difference between when it was written in 2004 isn't that much, so... Dick Westheimer says the shavings from chiseling can be a metaphor for memories. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. So just a lot you could do with this, actually. So this section here is the heart of the poem. These two middle stanzas, and I think you just expand more, and you can go in two different ways. Just focusing like a microscopic photography kind of on the tools. Or broaden up and jump, like we were talking about in the other poem, through a different door and sort of go back into scenes with the grandfather. And what memories do these items recall? That's the way you could go. Personally, I like the minimalist kind of zoning in, focusing in on the details. I think that would make for a cool poem because emotion lives in details. And so when we get really vivid details, these sort of cling to them somehow. Like that's like the material. Even though you don't think it would be, it is. So that's what I would focus on for this poem. Okay, it's been a half an hour. Let's move on to the second poem. And like I said, we have a very short poem. This is Alex Phuong, and this is Animal. And then we'll go to the grab bag in a second. So, animal. Human beings are animals, supposedly the dominant species. Nevertheless, people are still creatures, and some lack the willingness to care for one another. Yet the ones who care are truly the world. Be a beacon of hope for humanity. So that is a very, very short poem, Alex Phuong, Animal. And it feels very, it's, I don't want to say pedantic, but it's like sort of a morality type poem trying to teach us a lesson. And rather than, digging deep in the self for what's there to discover, it's sort of looking out and saying, this is what I see out there, right? It's instructions kind of. And as a result, it ends up kind of flat to me. It doesn't have a lot of things to engage with. Human beings are animals, supposedly the dominant species. Nevertheless, people are still creatures, and some lack the willingness to care for one another. So these things are all like true statements. They're sort of messages, and there's just not a lot to grasp and to cling on to. Like if we could see this metaphor, I mean, it's not really a metaphor because human beings are animals, but if we could sort of be made to see human beings more as animals, because we don't tend to think of it that way. We tend to think we're special. If there's a way to like make this be seen in like a new, vivid way, there's that whole what's that movie where they it's got Robin Williams and they stand on the desk to see the world a little different. Is a poetry teacher. I can't remember the word. Someone will tell me in a second. But there's a way that you sort of use a poem to see something from a different perspective, and that could be done here with this metaphor. How are we moving through as animals instead of like abstract things like dominant species? Can he show us being animals even though we're supposedly the dominant species? People are still creatures, and some lack the willingness to care for one another. Yet the ones who care are truly the world. Be a beacon of hope for me. And then we get this admonition here, or suggestion, advice at the end. Be a beacon for hope. Dead Poet Society, Julian Matthews. Thank you. Yeah, that's Dead Poet Society I was thinking of. But that's the kind of thing that a poem, that's what a poem really does. It functions to make you see the world a little differently. And this doesn't really have anything to let you do that with. So there's no specific details. It's really what's missing is like specificity. And maybe, sometimes more formal poetry can get away with being sort of this generalized, where it's like the thing that attracts your attention and sort of moves the poem along are the like the rhythm and the way the shape and the rhymes work together, and you can sort of like the text itself can be sort of the interesting thing that drives the poem forward. But here we have a free verse poem. There aren't really any images or details. There's just nothing to go with. It's like a thought that doesn't give us anything to sort of be transformed by. So I don't know. So if you want to write a poem about this, like finding a way in that does that is the key. And so I don't know, like think about how you could, like what kind of extended metaphor could you use to show this, or what story could you tell? Poems are more than just stories, but story is an important role too. Let's see. And Fran Smith says, I like to be a beacon of light, as there is a lot of darkness around. Yeah, that I do. That's a good advice and a good thing to say. And I wonder if maybe maybe an extended metaphor could be there, I mean, maybe be a beacon of hope for humanity. Then you can extend how the beacon looks, and use that as the sort of lever in to something interesting that sort of sticks in your brain. Because as Fran says, there is a lot of darkness around. So what if the poem was like that instead? What if the poem was be a beacon for hope, be a beacon of hope for humanity? There's a lot of darkness around, and then it moves through that. And then you get this sort of beacon being there, and what that beacon means and represents, and how it's positioned in things, and where the edge of the darkness is. You could go a long way with this as the first line, and then extending that metaphor through. And that would have sort of substance to hold on to, and then make it memorable. I mean, that's really, I guess, the fundamental thing is that you need specificity for something to be memorable and to sort of grip you in that way. And so the poem could start there, and that would work. Let's see. Shanna Renee Dodd says it'd be lovely if this were captioned. Do you mean the video itself, closed captioning? I don't think it's done in real time, if that's what you mean. I don't think it's done in real time, but if you watch like in maybe an hour, then the replay is automatically captioned, if that's what you mean. Let's see. Let's see if we have any. Okay, I think that's kind of all we have to say about this poem. There's just it needs to find a way into the idea. A poem can't just be an idea, because then even if you read like something similar is like reading the Psalms in the Bible, right? They're lessons too in morality and things, but they're told through story and through metaphor, and that's kind of what's missing here. Like we can still do that without a religious context, but you still need those elements to be compelling and interesting. So think of it that way, and think of how the Bible would do it, and maybe that's the way to think about it. Okay, so I don't know. I think that's it for this poem. But thanks for sharing this. This was Alex Phuong, and then the other poet was Gavin Bourke. So we talked about these two poems, and now let's do this grab bag thing, and we'll see what we can come up with. Let's see. So over here we have a few people who sent in some poems, and I'll just go in the order they were received as long as they make sense. Oops, we don't want the music yet. I should have turned that off. So let's go to. So this first poem, I'm having trouble with the final sentence in the final stanza. This is Peggy Turnbull. And the poem is, I watched my husband through the window. So let's read this poem, and then we'll just focus especially on where to go with this final sentence. So we'll see if we can see, this is kind of a new experiment. We'll see if this is helpful. We've done a lightning round before, where we just sort of ran through really quickly and looked at different poems. But we'll see if we can sort of do a more focused kind of lightning round for the next 20 minutes or so. Yeah, we ended up with 20 minutes left. So here's this. Again, this is Peggy Turnbull. This is, I watched my husband through the window. Every morning he grinds raw peanuts, stirs sweet? How do you say that? I'm not sure. Goes to the garden where he tosses nuggets of lard and cornmeal onto the ground, hunched over as if bowing thanks to nature. Chipmunks wait beneath rhubarb leaves. Soon they'll scrabble for his gold. He makes our backyard into a sanctuary decorated with birdsong and flowers. He knows the hope of farmers, practices the daily devotion of pulling weeds, wears light pajamas from the night before. Outside, they look like the loose clothing of Vietnamese farmers during the war, or the cotton camisas of Mexican obreros painted by Diego Rivera. On a brick path that leads to a raspberry patch, two pink blotches appear on the black background. There his toes protruding through the seams of his favorite slippers. All my high-flown thoughts disappear, and he is my husband again. Very interesting. I think it's a really good, well-written poem, Peggy. Thanks for sharing this. And so let's talk about this ending, because I do feel like the ending is off. I think you're right to be asking about that. And I wonder, maybe the issue is that it's sort of too long. Like, because this image of his toes protruding through the seams of his favorite slippers, I think that sort of works to pull us back in the way that we're being pulled back. Let me see if I have. Oops, hang on a second. Where'd it go? Probably. Anyway, so I think, what if it was something that very short? Like, what if you sort of made this second to last line? I'm having trouble like highlighting. I guess I can't. Oh, there you go. So what if you made sort of this second to last sentence sort of the final sentence? because it's a very strong image to end on. There is toes pointing, because we see these on a brick path that leads to a raspberry patch. 2 pink blotches appear on a black background. It's hard to see that. I think this can maybe be described a little more clearly. On a brick path that leads to a raspberry patch, 2 pink blotches appear. I think it's the appear is kind of it's not very precise in the way, like, it doesn't like allow you to see the situation as well as it seems like it would. So maybe that can be told a little better. But I like this. They are his toes, because we don't know what they are at first, and that kind of works. They are his toes protruding through the seams of his favorite slippers. And then what if the last line, and then if it's like comma, just his toes, or just the toes, or something like that, that really pulls this idea that, you know, somehow where the image can make this idea that he's my husband again, and the high-flown thoughts disappear. I think you could do that through the image, and rather than just describing it. But let's see what other people, what other advice people have. So Nate Jacobs says, first stanza, not the last stanza. So interesting. So I do think the last stanza can use work. Let me look at the first stanza instead. This is and Peggy's comment here on Facebook. She's mentioning the final line of the first stanza. Well, let's look at that then. Let me see. So the final line of the first stanza, and that would be this here. They look like the loose clothing of Vietnamese farmers during the war, or the cotton camisas of Mexican obreros, painted by Diego Rivera. I think the, I don't know, the painted by Diego Rivera feels a little, it sort of pulls you out a little bit. It's a little too much, to reference a painter like that. Makes the focus more on that than just the scene, I think. So I would probably just end this. I'm not sure what the question is about this line, actually. I would probably end, though, on the obreros and leave it there. Unless you want to sort of build more Diego Rivera into it. And maybe Diego Rivera could come back in the last line of the last stanza. Maybe he's, he's not a painting by Diego Rivera, he's my husband again, and you kind of pull that back through, if that makes sense. Let's see. See if we have any other comments here. Fran Smith says, I like the fullness of his nature-caring character, the positive intention of his peanuts, and how far beyond the apparent discarding they reach. And Jamie O'Halloran Whitemarsh says, tender tone maintained through the poem with lovely images. Yeah, I agree. I really like this poem. I think it's nice. I think it could use a little bit of tweaking here and there, but I think it's a good poem. I'm not sure. Let me show you this poem too. Let's see. Let me try to find this. This poem kind of reminded me of this, Sawdust by Judith Tate O'Brien. And we'll see how she does it, just for a comparison of a similar poem. Here we go. This is Judith Tate O'Brien, and it's from rattle number 22 on Oldie But Goodie. Judith Tate O'Brien, Sawdust, and that is Rumi. There are many ways to kneel and kiss the earth. At his workbench, my Catholic husband becomes a Buddhist, practicing mindfulness. As if entranced, he attends the hammers, rhythmic up and down. He feeds the planer a plank of cedar. Beside a Folger's coffee can of nails on the windowsill, the clock ticks the present tense is. When he walks to the table saw, he moves deliberately like an egret stepping into its own watery reflection. There he contemplates the sawness of saw. He doesn't brush off the sawdust film falling all over him like a coat of serenity. Sometimes he makes a rocking cradle, sometimes a porch swing for us to sit in. So that kind of can apply to the first poem too, or the second poem by Gavin Bourke about the carpenter father. You can sort of look through for details, and the way details are laid out here too. But see how this poem sort of maintains in sort of the space. Like, it doesn't go into like sharing my thoughts about it. It ends with what he makes, and it describes the process of the making, and then ends with some of the things he makes, and then those have implications. And so if we go back and look at this poem, what we get here instead is all my high flown thoughts disappear. And so the poem, even though you didn't ask about the ending, I think the ending is sort of what's a little off. And what it's off is that it's we have this here, all my high flown thoughts disappear. We want that to find a way to be shown, not told, basically, that my high flown thoughts disappear. Even just the fact, even if they were just all those thoughts disappear, if we left it a little more vague, and sort of let us make the leap that like I'm overthinking and these are high flown thoughts, like let us have that as something a conclusion we can draw ourselves, and maybe that's a little better way to do it. So I would suggest changing. I would play with these last three lines a little bit and see what else you could do with them. The last line of the first stanza, I'm not sure. I don't really have anything. I think maybe I think the Diego Rivera, if you're going to pull up Diego Rivera, you got to use it more. I think there's not enough. I mean, maybe earlier there could be more of a sense that these the sense that there's a painting scene going on here. If that was sort of extended throughout, that would make a little more sense. That's my only issue with this. I'm not really sure what your issue was with this last line. Let me see. Maybe said in the comments. Let's see. Okay, well, let's move on to the next one. Yeah, and Jamie O'Halloran Whitmarsh says the second to last sentence might be the more successful if it ends with the image of the pink toes. Yeah, I think that could be a way to end it. So that's what I would play with in that poem, mostly. Okay, let's do another one. Let's see what we have. Oops, we don't want to do that one. Let's see. Mark this as unread. Okay. So James Langford is here too. He has nothing special. I'm going to put this in a Word doc. It makes it a little easier to share. Just 1 second there. Then I can make this, resize it and stuff. Okay. So here is this weight. Zoom in a little bit. So this is Weight, and this is a poem. There's nothing specific, but it's a short poem. So let's just look at this. This was a poem by James Langford again. So let's take a look at this. Weight. Let's get that nice in there. Let's zoom in a little more. Okay. Wait. Dark corridors, a sleepless night again till dawn. It's 4 a.m., searching cobwebs and catacombs. I chanced upon a curio my mind's eye did invite. Brass scales like Lady Justice holds and stamped into the basin bold upon the left side. Place here every joy you'll come to know and stamp below the right. Emptiness, my shadow pale forewarned of this. In losing you, what's left of me I place upon the plate, that plate, empty, and therein lies love's plight. So I like the format of this in the sort of the strength of the lines. There's a really good cadence to it that you can feel. I feel a little bit. I'm a little bit like not connected to the poem. Dark quarters, a sleepless night again till dawn. It's 4 a.m. So we don't really know what's going on at the start of this poem. Searching cobwebs and catacombs, I chanced upon a curio my mind's eye did invite. So I don't really know what's, we don't feel connected here at the beginning, but I love the sounds and the rhythms of this. Brass scales like Lady Justice holds. So this is a curio that we found. Brass scales like Lady Justice holds and stamped into the basin bold of that hold and bold. There's just nice rhythms here. Upon the left side, place here every joy you'll come to know, and stamp below the right. Emptiness, my shadow, pale, forewarned of this. So we get the my. I just don't know who the my is and who the you is. There's a sort of a very distanced sort of feel to this poem. In losing you, what's left of me I place upon that plate, empty, and therein lies love's plate. And so we get sort of in losing you, there was nothing to put on the scales of the person. And I'm not sure if it's like a breakup. I think it's a breakup type poem or situation or a divorce, and there was nothing placed there. But I wonder if, I don't know, I think just this opening doesn't draw us in. I think that's the issue and doesn't really let us know enough. I mean, if it was just, I don't know, if it somehow just started with going through the, I chanced upon the curio. I don't know. I'm not sure. Let me see. What are people saying about this poem? Because I'm not feeling drawn into it early on is the issue for me here. But I like the rhythms of it, and I like the ending. I think it sort of fits together well toward the end. So let's see what people are saying, what you guys are saying about this. Sounds a bit like Edgar Allan Poe. Fran Smith needs to go. See you later, Fran. Peter King Badger O'Donohue says, sounds a bit archaic in language style. It does. Let's see. Yeah, so I don't know. The thing to work on, I think, with this poem is just the beginning, because I think the ending works, but it's set up in a way that doesn't draw me in. I mean, A Sleepless Night. I don't know. The beginning is where it's off to me. Yeah, Andrew Gunner suggests maybe a better title for more connection. Tom Barlow says it's not clear what is stamped on the right side. Yeah. So on the left side is place here every joy you'll come to know, and stamped below the right, emptiness. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not sure either. So on the right is that, place here every joy you'll come to know, and stamped below the right, emptiness, my shadow pale, forewarned of this, in losing you. Yeah, so what is stamped on the right? And James Langford in the comments says grief. I don't know, it's a little unclear. But it's unclear in a way that that you fill in the blank, kind of. And that's sort of almost the point of the poem, is that you can fill in that blank of what was written there on the right. And James Langford is grief, and so it's a joy and grief, joy on one side, like a positive and negative. And I think that works. So to me, if I was just drawn into the poem in a way that felt more natural or more interesting in the opening, I think this poem would work pretty well. So that's my advice for this one. Let's see who else we can look at next. Hope these are helpful. Let's go to Angela Gartner sent one in. Says, how can I improve? I do more free verse than a pattern. I feel I end badly all the time, is what Angela says. I'm going to open this in a Word file too. Just makes it easier to zoom and highlight. So here we go. Switch to this one. Oops, that's not right. Switch to, where do we go? Properties, I used the wrong one, sorry. There it is. Okay, so this is a clock that started when my hair died. The bald spot, I'm going to zoom in a little bit too. There we go. The clock that started when my hair died. The bald spot on my head, between the long, thin strands I cover with black cream. It could have been from the hair ties that held the bouncy curls of my 20s and 30s when bags underneath my eyes were hidden, or how I ran my fingers in my hair when I was nervous about my newborn, but the patch seemed to appear one day, like the white specks that sprouted throughout my head and chin. It was my death clock that started. The ticking rung loudly in my ears. I noticed the tires in my body were deflating and needed air. The chairs I sat in didn't feel young. My teens, fresh, with years ahead of them, would leave me soon as I get closer to being half done. But the girl I see in the photo albums, the one who is married, skinny, with a thick, dyed red hair and a goofy grin, I feel she's still there, beneath the premature, wrinkled skin. So that is the clock that started when my hair died. And I think it tells a story, really well moving through. Like, we know exactly what the poem is about and what's going on in a way that's not boring. I think it's compelling. The bald spot on my head between the long, thin strands I cover with black cream. It could have been from the hair ties that held the bouncy curls of my 20s and 30s when bags underneath my eyes were hidden, or how I ran my fingers in my hair, but when I was nervous about my newborn, but the patch seemed to appear one day. I wonder if the patch, and I think there should be no comma here, but I wonder if the patch seemed to appear one day could be even the first line to sort of jump into it faster, like the white specks that sprouted throughout my head and chin. It was my death clock that started, and so we get the clock repeating here. The clock that started is the death clock. The ticking rung loud in my ears. I noticed the tires in my body were deflating and needed air. The chairs I sat in didn't feel young. My teens, fresh with years ahead of them, would leave me soon as I got closer to being half done. But the girl I see in the photo albums, the one who is married, skinny, with thick dyed hair and a goofy grin, I feel she's there, beneath the premature, wrinkled skin. I think this image at the end is really strong. And maybe I see in the photo albums, or even in a, like, we sort of get a scene almost where, like, looking in the mirror, I kind of see the mirror a little bit, kind of a situation. But we could see the speaker looking at the photo albums and sort of pull through that as like the central thread. I think maybe would make this poem work really well. So let me see if anybody has any advice for this one. Let's see. The possessive in the last line. I think that might be the last poem. Let's see. M. Carr says, great title and several great lines as well. And I think what's missing here to me is like a central sort of, almost a touchstone to it. Like where we get the story told through here. But if we could find a way to like sort of position the speaker, that's kind of what I was getting at with this at the end of the photo albums. If we could sort of see that as like a little scene where the speaker is like looking at the old photograph, and we can sort of always know we're in that space, then we end up sort of entering the poem a little bit more and having a little bit more empathy and sort of feeling the feeling of it. So I think of that as like a frame, or like a and kind of like a picture frame to hold the poem, like a container for it, as sort of the setup. And I think that could be heightened for the setup here. So that's what I would say about this poem. But let's move on, because we gotta try to get this get through. We have several people sent poems in. There's two more. Let's do this really quick. And Mark Grenier just says, "Does this poem work for you?" So let's try this really quick. This is Mark Grenier's poem, and just, does this work for you, is his question. Morning Joe. Here we go. Morning Joe. Morning, my love. How do you think this sounds? The day's work keeps grinding fine the coffee beans of life. the grounds with which we open eyes to all that can't be done. Another morning's cup of joe with toast, fresh eggs, and bacon fried at 6 a.m. The things we do again and again, every day, everywhere, anyway. I kind of like this ending, every day, everywhere, anyway. I think it's a really good line. Morning, my love, how do you think this sounds? The day's work keeps grinding fine, the coffee beans of life. That feels a little too forced. I would wonder if, the coffee beans of life is sort of a little sort of too, trying to push the reader too far. The grounds with which we open eyes to all that can't be done. Another morning's cup of joe with toast, fresh eggs, and bacon fried. I like the sounds of this too at the end. Another, the bacon fried at 6 a.m. The things we do again and again, every day, everywhere. Anyway, I think, again, it's sort of similar to Angela's poem. I like parts of it. I like this part right here, and I like the descriptions. I think really the last 4 lines I like a lot. I think the framing of the morning, my love, how do you think this sounds? Doesn't really do it justice. I wonder if it could even work as just a 4-line kind of really short, epigram type poem. Because I do like that ending, the things we do again and again. I think this is the heart of the poem that sort of sprung out and sort of worked. And that's the thing to sort of play against. How can you maximize those 2 lines, which I think work really well. Let's see. I think that the chats are a little bit behind. So I don't know if we're going to get your comments in on these poems, but we'll just have my comments. Jamie O'Halloran, I think talking about the last poem, says this reminds me of Sandra Cisneros' poem. The device she uses could be useful for this, and this is let's see, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, if anybody wants to look that up. I think that's talking about Angela's poem, I think. Noreen Ellis, I think it was Angela's poem again, says, good poem, I'd play with moving the lines around and looking for more rhymes. Good advice there. Or maybe he's talking, maybe, I'm not sure which poem Noreen's talking about. But, okay. And Colleen Blackman says, omit of life in this poem, the coffee beans of life. Yeah, that's just too, what is the word for it? It's too, I don't know, too grandiose or something to say the coffee beans of life. Okay, let's do one last poem. And this is Nate Jacobs. And Nate Jacobs says, this is nerve-wracking. Is this a decent sonnet? Is the language of it too much? It's certainly not my normal tone. I was attempting to write in a classic style, but loosely. So how does this sonnet feel as far as the language of it? Is it too much? Does it work? And it's sort of a new attempt at writing in form. So let's see. We'll get this poem here. This is Sonnet 1. This is Nate Jacob. Sonnet 1. If ever word existed, it is lost. Thus, I am left to wander long this life in search of means, no more labor's cost, of showing true my love for you, dear wife. No borrowed phrase of oracles dead long, no master work of Michelangelo, no opus wrought, composed of angels' song, can soon approach the fullness of my soul, which sooner still would stop all words in short, deny this fool his fumbling efforts make, his ship to stay in silent lover's port, then risk be dashed apart by fool's words spake. Know this, my love, though I can ill compose, I've sensed it writ, be still, I love you so. I think I like the sounds work really well as far as the sonnet form goes. I think the inversions and sort of anachronisms, personally, I would pull those out and sort of try to find a more balance, like the fool's words spake, things like that are really anachronistic. I'm not sure what's gained by doing that in poems these days. So I would sort of avoid that. But I like the rest of it. And as far as the rhymes and the metaphor, I think you should keep working with sonnets. I think it's a good form. And I think the rhythms and the rhymes work really well here. This is another poem like we were talking about before, where there aren't a lot of images or descriptions or story, but the form itself can drive the poem forward, and I think that works well here. So we were talking about with Alex Phuong's poem, The Animal, that if it were in form, that could kind of work, just having a more didactic sort of intellectual space that you're operating from. And so that's one of the benefits of writing a formal poem like this. If ever word existed, it is lost. Thus I am left to wander long this life in search of means, no matter labor's cost. I really like that. That's a great opening. Of showing true my love for you. I think true my love for you, because we have the end rhymes. The rhyme here stands out as a little bit too much. No borrowed phrase of oracles. I think here is where we get too archaic. The oracle's dead long. No masterwork of Michelangelo. I like see the difference between just these two lines. No borrowed phrase of oracles dead long, which I think is too archaic and too unnecessarily, old style. But no masterwork of Michelangelo is written in a way that we would actually speak. So I think, focus on writing lines like this, no masterwork of Michelangelo, and not no borrowed phrase of oracles dead long. No opus wrought, composed of angel song. Again, this one works, I think, too, like the no masterwork. No opus wrought, composed of angels song. So that's a little old-fashioned, but not so much that it's stilted. Can soon approach the fullness of my soul. The Angelo soul, that's an interesting rhyme. Which soon still would stop all words in short, deny this fool his fumbling efforts make. Again, it's this fumbling efforts make that I think, to my ears, just too much of that archaic, stilted way of writing, way of speaking. His ship to stay in silent lover's port, then risk be dashed apart by fool's words spake. Yeah, I would work on this. Oops, I don't know why I italicized it. But I would work on that section there. No, my love, though I can ill compose, I've sensed it writ, be still, I love you so. I think the last couplet could do more. So I think maybe it works well, except for the last 5 lines I'd work on. And a few of these, the dead oracles and things like that, are a little too much. So I'd work on this section here, mainly. I think that's it's just not as interesting as the rest. I think the rest works really well. So, and that's sort of the turn. Like you have the turn in a sonnet, and sort of after the turn, it's just not as strong as it was before the turn. So that's what I would focus on that. All right. Well, we are well past an hour. But it was fun to do. It's fun to do a couple extra poems. So thanks for sharing these to Nate Jacob and everybody else who shared poems. I archived them, so I don't see them right now. But yeah, thanks everybody for sharing those. And we are going to call it a day. But thanks for joining me. And this week's guest coming up on the Rattlecast is going to be Joseph Fasano. Joseph Fasano is a winner of I think maybe the 3rd Rattle Poetry Prize back in 2009, maybe. I could be wrong about that. But his poem Mahler in New York is just a wonderful poem that won the Rattle Poetry Prize about 12 years ago or so. And in the time since, he's published 3 books of poetry and a novel, maybe 4 books of poetry and a novel. His most recent book of poetry is The Crossing. We've published him maybe a half dozen times. Just a wonderful poet as far as just the beauty of his language. He has a very distinctive style, and it'll be really interesting talking to him. He's also used to be started as an astrophysicist. That'll be fun to talk about too. So he had a sort of a career jump, and now he's really focuses on writing, and he's a professor at should be good talking to Joseph Fasano. And that is Rattlecast number 114. The prompt for this week was Write a poem. Oh no, I just didn't update it. So someone has to tell me what the prompt was for this week. I'll find it. But you know what it is. I gotta update this webpage. Here, let me find it really quick before I go. Hang on. Just bear with me. The prompt for this week was, then I'll update the webpage afterward. Oh yeah, it was write a poem in the second person. And then Megan listed one of the most famous poems written in the second person is Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. So that's sort of an idea of what we mean. You poems addressed to somebody, speaking in the second person. That is your prompt for this week. And once again, we will have Joseph Asano as the guest. Really looking forward to that. He's going to be talking about across several books, good stuff. And we'll see you then. Radicalcast number 114, Sunday, October 17th, regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. See you then. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime. Goodbye.